Hello everyone. In this video, we'll explore how to use the case function in Looker Studio to enhance your dataset analysis. The case function allows you to group, segment, and create new metrics that simplify data analysis. Today we'll look at 3 examples of using this function. So let's move on to our report. We have a starting table with our transactions by date, category, region, revenue, and quantity of units sold. According to our condition, we also have 3 tasks for specific segmentation, grouping, and so on. So let's break down each of them. For the first task, we need to group products by category, segmenting them and focusing only on those that will be divided into the 5 largest by revenue and all the others. We can write this formula in 2 ways. We can go to Resource, Manage Added Data Sources, then go to our data source, click Edit, and here we will have Add a Field. After that, we add a calculated field, and here we will have a dialog box where we can set the name and set the formula itself. What is the second option? A little faster. This is if we set it immediately through the window with the settings of our data source. Here it is shown. If it is not displayed, then you need to click on this icon. We've already created suitable formulas. Today we'll specifically talk about the syntax and how they were formed. So, for the first task of grouping categories, we created the field category grouped. So, let's go into it and see how we need to write our formulas to group our data. So, the case function itself consists of the following key components. First, it's the beginning of the formula with case. We set the case itself. Then we write when, set some condition, then write else. This is what we need to do with this data if it doesn't meet the previous condition. And then we close our function with end. So, regarding our example, our top 5 products by sales we've listed here in double quotes. It's very important to remember to make sure you don't have any mistakes and write exactly as you have in your categories. Otherwise, the formulas will not work. And don't forget that we write text values in double quotes. So, we set when the category corresponds to electronics, clothing, and so on, then we substitute the category name. If the category name does not contain these values, then we define them as other and close. Accordingly, let's see how this worked in our table. Here's our first table, and we see that by default we have categories and revenue here. We see our top 5. Here, for convenience, we've already added our new grouping field to the dimension. And now we can change the display to another grouping. And now we see that, through our second newly created field, only our top 5 sales categories remained, and everything else was defined as other. This is the simplest type of grouping that is used. Let's now consider other options. Task number 2. We need to segment our revenue into categories such as high, medium, and low, depending on which transaction brought us that particular revenue. Accordingly, we will work with table number 2. Here we have already substituted our value, and let's see what the syntax of our formula for revenue group consists of. So, we go to our revenue group field and see what we did there. Here our formula is slightly different, but overall the logic is the same. Only here we use 2 when conditions at the same time. In the first case, we set the conditions if revenue is greater than some value. Then we substitute the text value high revenue. If we have a revenue between one value and another, then medium. Of course, you can set your own values, and everything else? We don't have to specify revenue less than, for example, 5,000, we can just write else, and our text value low revenue. And we close our formula with end, respectively, so that this is a complete formula. So we see that here we use different signs, greater than and less than. And we were also able to use additional values such as between and. We save. And now we see that as a result, we get that according to the conditions we set, more than 15 is high revenue. Everything in the middle, we specially left for you in yellow. This is medium revenue. And then we added low revenue, that is using this additional field. Accordingly, we didn't have to do this within the data source itself. We were able to do it directly in Looker Studio. And let's move on to the very last example. Third, here we will use a slightly more complex version of the case. And in the third task, we need to analyze sales efficiency by the average revenue per unit. Since by default, our fields do not have a calculation of how much revenue we have per unit, respectively, we will need to calculate this additionally in our case function, and after that, distribute it depending on what our revenue per unit is into 3 levels: high, medium, and low, as we did in the previous example. So, for this, we created an additional field called sales efficiency, and let's look at its syntax. We go click on the formula icon and look. As we can see, here we combine 2 previous approaches. Respectively, we have case and end remain exactly the same. We also have 2 conditions and else. What changes here? Here we change the fact that we also add an additional formula, how revenue is divided by units sold. That is, respectively, in order for us to calculate the efficiency of revenue per unit, we need to calculate it initially, and we do this right in the formula. Accordingly, we set that when revenue divided by units sold is greater than some value, then we have high efficiency, if in some range, then medium, and everything else in low efficiency. Accordingly, as you can see, in case formulas, it is not necessary to use ordinary groupings, but you can also immediately set additional conditions using the formula. So we click Done. Let's look at our result. And as a result, we see that here, even though it's not immediately obvious, we have revenue, we have units sold, respectively. We can have a value of, for example, 14,000. But since we sold as many as 22 units, we see that the value of 1 unit will be less than that of, for example, the category of books, where we sold for 13,000, but at the same time only 12 units, respectively. Now we have segmented it more strongly depending on the sales efficiency per unit. Also, for clarity in our lesson today, we used color indication for visualization, so if you want an additional video on how to do this, you can leave us a comment. And in conclusion, I want to say that the case function is quite common. It helps a lot in creating additional categories, making additional calculations, and in general, improving work with your data. That's all for today. Give it a like if you enjoyed the video. If you still have any questions, ask them in the comments.